I was exactly 4 minutes away from the interview that would save my family, but as I looked at the helpless woman stranded in the pouring rain, I knew I was about to throw my entire future away. Welcome to another amazing GL story. If you love gripping romances, intense drama, and stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment down below to let us know you're watching. Your support means the world to us. Now let's dive into the story. Part 1: The Choice. The alarm clock buzzed with a harsh, grating sound at 5 a.m., but Chloe was already awake. She had been staring at the water stain on the ceiling of her cramped apartment for the last 3 hours, her mind racing with a million different disastrous scenarios. Today was not just another Tuesday. Today was the day that could rewrite the ending of her family's tragedy. Chloe threw off the thin, worn blanket and tiptoed across the creaky hardwood floor. She didn't want to wake her grandmother, Grace, whose gentle, raspy breathing could be heard from the small alcove they called a second bedroom. Grace had been sick for the better part of a year, and the medical bills had piled up into a mountain that threatened to crush them both. Chloe was working 2 grueling jobs, serving coffee at dawn and waiting tables until midnight, but it barely covered the rent, let alone the specialized care her grandmother desperately needed. Today, however, held the promise of salvation. Chloe had an interview at Sterling Corp, the most prestigious advertising and tech firm in the city. Landing the junior marketing executive position meant a salary that would instantly lift them out of poverty, and more importantly, it came with premium health insurance. She stood in front of the small bathroom mirror, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned up her only professional outfit. It was a navy blue suit she had found at a thrift store, which she had meticulously taken in and tailored herself using her grandmother's old sewing machine. It wasn't designer, but it fit her perfectly. She smoothed down her dark blonde hair, tying it back into a neat, professional bun, and took a deep, steadying breath. "You can do this," Chloe whispered to her reflection, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her anxiety. "You have to do this. You look beautiful, my brave girl," a fragile voice called out from the hallway. Chloe turned to see her grandmother leaning against the doorframe, wrapped in a thick shawl. Her face was pale, drawn from exhaustion, but her eyes held a fierce pride that made Chloe's heart ache. "Nana, you should be in bed." Chloe rushed over, gently taking the older woman's arm to support her. "I wanted to see you off," Grace smiled, patting Chloe's hand warmly. "Don't you worry about me today. Just go in there and show them the brilliant, capable woman I know you are. Whatever happens, I am so incredibly proud of you." Tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to ruin her makeup now. She hugged her grandmother tightly, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of peppermint and old books. "I'll call you the second it's over," Chloe promised, grabbing her worn leather portfolio. The morning air was bitterly cold, and a heavy, relentless rain was washing over the gray city streets. Chloe held her umbrella tight, navigating the crowded sidewalks with a sense of frantic urgency. Her interview was at 9 a.m. sharp. It was currently 8:30 a.m., and she was only a few blocks away from the towering glass structure of the Sterling building. She was perfectly on time. But as she waited at a busy intersection, checking her watch for the 5th time, something caught her eye. Across the street, struggling near the edge of a jagged curb, was a woman in a sleek silver wheelchair. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the woman was frantically pushing against the wheels, but the front right caster was wedged deep into a cracked, uneven storm drain. The more she pushed, the more the chair seemed to tip dangerously toward the busy street where morning traffic was speeding by. Dozens of people rushed past her, their heads ducked under umbrellas, completely ignoring the woman's silent struggle. It was the morning rush hour in the city. Nobody had time for a stranger. Chloe's heart pounded against her ribs. She looked at the Sterling building, its massive logo glowing through the fog just a block away. Then she looked down at her watch. 8:35 a.m. If she crossed the street to help, she would have to wait for the long light cycle again, untangle the chair, and inevitably ruin her pristine suit in the mud and downpour. She would be late. The Sterling Corp HR email had explicitly stated, Tardiness will result in immediate cancellation of your interview. Just keep walking, a practical, desperate voice in her head whispered. You need this job to save Nana. But the woman in the wheelchair slipped, her hands losing their grip on the wet rims, and the chair jerked violently toward the rushing traffic, almost spilling her onto the pavement. Chloe didn't think. She just moved. Dropping her umbrella, she dashed into the crosswalk, dodging a honking taxi and ran straight toward the woman. The icy rain instantly soaked through her thrifted suit, chilling her to the bone, but she didn't care. She dropped to her knees right in a puddle of freezing gray water and grabbed the front frame of the wheelchair. Hold on, I've got you, Chloe yelled over the roar of the traffic and the relentless rain. The woman looked down, and for a second the rest of the chaotic world faded away. She had the most intense, piercing ice-blue eyes Chloe had ever seen. Despite being soaked, the woman radiated an intimidating elegance. Her raven-black hair was plastered to her sharp, aristocratic jawline, and she wore a tailored black suit that screamed unimaginable wealth. There was frustration in those eyes, but beneath it, a flicker of genuine shock that someone had actually stopped. The wheel is caught in the iron grate, the woman said, her voice surprisingly calm, authoritative, and rich despite the panic of the situation. I see it. I'm going to lift the front end. On the count of 3, pull back on your wheels as hard as you can, Chloe instructed, wiping the blinding rain from her eyes. The woman gave a curt nod. 1, 2, 3. Chloe gritted her teeth and pulled upward with all her strength. The metal groaned against the iron grate. For a terrifying second, it wouldn't budge, but Chloe adjusted her grip, ignoring the sharp scrape of the pavement against her knuckles, and heaved. With a loud pop, the wheel freed itself, and the woman rolled backward to the safety of the flat sidewalk. Chloe collapsed back onto her heels, panting heavily. Her knees were soaked in muddy water, her hair was plastered to her face in a messy tangle, and her beautiful, carefully ironed suit was completely ruined. Are you all right? The woman asked. She didn't sound like someone who had just been rescued. She sounded like someone used to being in charge of the world. But as she looked at Chloe's muddy knees, her cold expression softened slightly. You're bleeding. Chloe looked down at her knuckles, which were indeed scraped and dotted with bright red blood. It's nothing, she breathed out, suddenly remembering why she was out in this storm in the first place. Panic seized her throat like a vice. She frantically checked her watch. 8:52 a.m. Oh no. No, Chloe scrambled to her feet, grabbing her soaked portfolio from the ground. I'm so sorry, I have to go. I have to go right now. Wait, the woman called out, reaching a hand toward her. Let me compensate you. You ruined your clothes. Who are you? I don't have time, I'm just glad you're safe. Chloe yelled over her shoulder, already sprinting blindly down the block. Her lungs burned as she ran, her wet shoes squishing loudly with every desperate step. By the time she burst through the massive revolving doors of the Sterling Corp lobby, she looked like she had just crawled out of a shipwreck. She hurried to the towering marble reception desk, gasping for air, her chest heaving. Excuse me, Chloe choked out, water dripping from her nose onto the immaculate glass counter. Chloe Adams. I have a 9 o'clock interview for the junior marketing executive position. The receptionist, a severe-looking man in an impeccable suit, slowly looked up from his monitor. His eyes dragged over Chloe's ruined hair, her muddy suit, and her bleeding knuckles with utter disdain. He glanced at the large digital clock on the wall. It read 9:04 a.m. Miss Adams, the receptionist said, his voice dripping with condescension. Your interview was scheduled for 9 o'clock exactly. We have a strict policy regarding punctuality. I know, I'm so sorry. There was an emergency on the street. Someone needed help. Sterling Corp does not deal in excuses. The receptionist cut her off smoothly, typing something into his computer. The position is highly competitive. Your interview has been canceled, and your application has been withdrawn. Chloe felt the floor drop out from underneath her. The air in the vast lobby suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Please, she begged, abandoning her pride entirely. Please, I need this job. I will wait all day in the lobby. I'll take a test right now. Just give me 5 minutes with the hiring manager. Security will escort you out if you do not leave voluntarily, Miss Adams. Have a good day. He didn't even look at her as he spoke. Cold, heavy numbness washed over Chloe. It was over. She had lost the one chance she had to save her grandmother. Slowly, mechanically, she turned around and walked back out into the freezing rain, her tears mixing with the downpour. She had no idea that across town, the woman with the ice-blue eyes was already making phone calls, furiously searching for the girl with the bleeding hands who had saved her life. End of Part 1. Part 2. The subway ride back to her neighborhood was a blur of gray shadows and rattling metal. Chloe sat perfectly still on the hard plastic seat, oblivious to the dampness of her ruined suit clinging to her shivering skin. The train car was half empty, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, hollow shadows across the faces of the few weary commuters sharing the carriage. Chloe stared blindly at her own reflection in the dark window opposite her. Her carefully pinned hair had completely unraveled, wet strands sticking to her pale cheeks. The scrape on her knuckles had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that matched the heavy, sinking feeling in her chest. She had failed. The words echoed in her mind with every clack of the train tracks. She was exactly 4 minutes late, and because of those 4 minutes, the doors to her future had been slammed shut. She thought about the towering stack of medical bills sitting on the chipped Formica counter in her kitchen. She thought about the way her grandmother, Grace, had looked at her that morning, with so much hope, so much unwavering belief. The thought of walking through the front door and extinguishing that light in her grandmother's eyes made Chloe feel physically sick. When she finally reached her apartment building, the rain had reduced to a miserable drizzle. She climbed the 5 flights of stairs, her wet shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum. Pausing outside her door, Chloe took a deep breath, forcing her trembling lips into a practiced, reassuring smile. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Chloe? Is that you, sweetheart?" Grace's voice called out from the living room. She was sitting in her worn armchair, a thick knitted blanket draped over her lap, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. "It's me, Nana," Chloe said, keeping her voice light and steady as she quickly shrugged off her ruined jacket, hiding the muddy stains. She walked over and kissed the top of Grace's head. "You're back early. And you're freezing." Grace reached up, her frail hand touching Chloe's cold cheek. "How did it go? Did you get to meet the hiring manager? Tell me everything." Chloe swallowed the massive lump in her throat. The lie tasted like ash on her tongue, but she couldn't break her grandmother's heart today. Not when Grace looked so fragile. It went okay, Nana. They had a lot of applicants, so it was mostly just filling out paperwork and a brief introduction. They said they'll call the top candidates next week. "Oh, I just know they'll call you," Grace beamed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "No one works harder than you, my girl. Now go take a hot shower before you catch your death. You still have your evening shift at the diner, don't you?" "Yeah," Chloe whispered, turning away before her eyes could betray her. "I have the evening shift." Across the city, high above the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, the atmosphere inside the Sterling Corp executive penthouse was completely different. It was a sprawling masterpiece of minimalist design, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, polished black marble floors, and sharp, angular furniture that looked expensive and entirely uninviting. At the center of it all sat Victoria Sterling. 32, Victoria was a titan of the tech and advertising industry. She had taken over her family's company after a tragic car accident 3 years ago, the same accident that had taken her parents and left her paralyzed from the waist down. The business world had expected her to crumble, assuming her physical limitations would make her weak. Instead, Victoria had returned with a vengeance, ruling her empire with an iron fist and a brilliantly ruthless mind. She was known as the Ice Queen, a woman who demanded absolute perfection and fired executives without a second thought. But today, the Ice Queen was profoundly distracted. Victoria sat in her custom-built silver wheelchair behind her massive mahogany desk, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her laptop. She wasn't looking at quarterly reports or stock projections. Her mind was entirely consumed by the image of a girl with dark blonde hair, kneeling in the freezing mud, pulling her heavy wheelchair from the iron grate with bleeding hands. "I don't have time, I'm just glad you're safe." The girl's panicked, breathless words kept looping in Victoria's head. People in Victoria's world did not do things for free. They did not ruin their expensive clothes or risk their own safety without expecting a favor, a check, or a promotion in return. Yet this girl hadn't even recognized her. She had just seen a woman in trouble, helped her, and sprinted away as if her life depended on it. "Daniel," Victoria's voice cut through the silent office like a diamond cutting glass. Her executive assistant, a sharply dressed man in his late 20s, materialized in the doorway almost instantly. "Yes, Miss Sterling? I need you to pull the city traffic camera footage from the intersection of 5th and Madison. The time frame is between 8:30 a.m. and 8:50 a.m. today," Victoria ordered, her piercing ice-blue eyes never leaving her laptop screen. "Find me the girl who pulled my chair out of the grate. I want to know where she went." Daniel didn't ask questions. 10 minutes later, he returned with a tablet, placing it carefully on Victoria's desk. "I tracked her path, Miss Sterling. It appears she ran straight from the intersection directly into our lobby." Victoria's brow furrowed in confusion. She reached out, her elegant, manicured fingers tapping the screen to play the lobby security footage. She watched as the drenched, muddy blonde girl burst through the revolving doors at exactly 9:04 a.m. The camera angle was perfect, capturing the desperate, pleading expression on the girl's face as she spoke to Richard, the head receptionist. Victoria watched in growing horror and fury as Richard smugly shook his head, typed something into his computer, and dismissed the girl. She watched the girl's shoulders collapse in total defeat before she slowly turned and walked back out into the storm. Victoria's blood ran ice cold. "Get Richard up here." "Now," Victoria said, her voice dangerously quiet. When the head receptionist stepped into the executive office 5 minutes later, he was visibly sweating. Victoria did not ask people to her office for friendly chats. "Miss Sterling, you asked to see me?" Richard stammered, shifting uncomfortably under her intense, unwavering glare. "A young woman came into the lobby this morning at 9:04 a.m., Victoria stated, her voice as smooth and deadly as silk. She was soaking wet. She had mud on her suit and blood on her hands. "I want you to tell me exactly what she was here for, and exactly what you said to her." Richard swallowed hard, his face paling. She was an applicant for the junior marketing executive position, ma'am. Her name was Chloe Adams. But she was 4 minutes late. Company policy strictly states that tardiness is unacceptable, so I informed her that her interview was canceled and her application was withdrawn. Victoria stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the room was so thick it felt suffocating. "She was 4 minutes late," Victoria repeated softly, "because she was saving my life in the middle of a thunderstorm, Richard." Richard's mouth dropped open. All the color drained completely from his face. "Miss Sterling, I didn't know. I was just following standard protocol." "You didn't ask," Victoria interrupted, her voice rising just enough to make him flinch. "You looked at someone who was clearly in distress, someone who was begging for 5 minutes of grace, and you chose arrogance over basic human decency. Clean out your desk, Richard. You are fired." "Miss Sterling, please." "Daniel, escort him out," Victoria commanded, turning her wheelchair away to face the sprawling window. "And bring me Chloe Adams' resume." When Daniel handed her the printed file, Victoria read it with intense fascination. Chloe Adams, 24 years old. Graduated top of her class from a state university. Brilliant recommendations, but a sparse professional history. As Victoria read further, her chest tightened. Chloe listed 2 current employers, a coffee shop in the mornings and a downtown diner in the evenings. She lived in a low-income neighborhood in Queens. pieces suddenly fit together. The cheap but meticulously tailored suit. The absolute desperation in her eyes. Chloe wasn't just looking for a job to advance her career, she was fighting for her survival. And Victoria had inadvertently cost her the one opportunity that could have saved her. By 9 p.m. that evening, the neon sign of Eddie's Diner was flickering weakly through the thick evening fog. Inside, the diner smelled of stale grease, burned coffee, and floor cleaner. Chloe was exhausted. Her feet ached, her scraped knuckles stung every time she wiped down a table, and her heart was a heavy, numb weight in her chest. "Hey, Blondie. I asked for a refill 10 minutes ago," a gruff, heavy-set man yelled from a corner booth, slamming his empty mug on the sticky table. "I'm so sorry, sir, coming right up," Chloe mumbled, grabbing the glass coffee pot. She felt like she was moving underwater. The crushing reality of her morning failure was finally settling in, and she had spent her entire break crying in the cramped employee bathroom. She poured the coffee, apologizing again as the man grumbled under his breath. She turned to head back to the counter when the little bell above the diner's glass door chimed brightly. The diner instantly fell dead silent. Chloe looked up, and her breath hitched in her throat. The coffee pot in her hand trembled dangerously. There, positioned just inside the doorway, was the woman from the intersection. She was no longer soaked in rain. She was dressed in a pristine, tailored white blazer and dark trousers, sitting perfectly straight in her sleek silver wheelchair. A towering bodyguard in a black suit stood respectfully behind her, holding the door open, but the woman waved him away with a subtle flick of her wrist. Contrast between Victoria Sterling and the greasy, run-down diner was so jarring it felt like a hallucination. The few patrons in the restaurant stopped chewing, staring openly at the commanding, breathtakingly beautiful woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a billionaire lifestyle magazine. Victoria's ice-blue eyes swept the room with mild distaste before landing squarely on Chloe. The moment their eyes locked, the air in the diner seemed to crackle with an intense, undeniable electricity. Chloe's heart began to hammer wildly against her ribs. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. Victoria slowly wheeled herself forward, gliding smoothly across the checkered linoleum floor until she stopped mere inches from where Chloe stood frozen. Close, Victoria's beauty was even more striking, her gaze intense and entirely focused. "You're a very difficult woman to track down, Chloe Adams," Victoria said. Her voice was low, rich, and utterly captivating. "And you and I have some unfinished business to discuss." End of Part 2. Part 3, the offer. The diner was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Chloe stood frozen, the half-empty coffee pot trembling in her grip. Her mind struggled to process the reality of the situation. The woman from the storm, the stunning, wealthy stranger she had pulled from the jaws of oncoming traffic, was sitting right in front of her, looking like a queen holding court in a greasy spoon diner. "Unfinished business?" Chloe echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Before the woman could say another word, the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen slammed open. Earl, the diner's manager, a perpetually sweaty man with a stained apron and a terrible temper, stormed out, wiping his hands on a towel. "Hey, what's the holdup out here?" Earl barked, marching toward the front. He stopped when he saw the wheelchair blocking the main aisle, his face twisting into a scowl. "Look, lady, you can't just park that thing in the middle of the floor. You're a fire hazard. Move it to a table or get out." The towering bodyguard behind the woman immediately stepped forward, his hands slipping inside his suit jacket, but the woman simply raised one elegant finger, stopping him in his tracks. She didn't even look at Earl. Her icy blue eyes remained fixed solely on Chloe. "Daniel," the woman said softly, her tone entirely bored. The sharp-dressed assistant stepped out from behind the wheelchair. He pulled out a sleek leather wallet, extracted a crisp stack of $100 bills, and placed them delicately onto the nearest sticky table. "For the disruption," Daniel said politely. "And to rent this section of your establishment for the next 20 minutes. I suggest you return to the kitchen." Earl stared at the pile of cash, his eyes bugging out of his head. He swallowed hard, his tough demeanor instantly evaporating. Right. Take your time, folks, he muttered, snatching the money and practically sprinting back through the swinging doors. The diner patrons, sensing the sheer gravity of the woman's presence, quickly paid their tabs and scurried out into the night, leaving Chloe completely alone with the intimidating stranger and her two men. Now, the woman said, gesturing gracefully to the red vinyl booth next to her. Please sit down, Chloe. Chloe's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move. She set the coffee pot on the counter with a shaky hand, wiped her palms on her apron, and slid into the booth. The woman wheeled herself closer, positioning her chair directly across from Chloe. The proximity made Chloe's breath hitch. She could smell the woman's perfume, a sophisticated, intoxicating blend of bergamot and cedarwood that completely overpowered the diner's smell of stale fries. How do you know my name? Chloe asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound brave. Who are you? The woman folded her manicured hands in her lap, studying Chloe's exhausted face, the dark circles under her eyes, and the messy hair shoved into a clip. When her gaze dropped to Chloe's scraped knuckles, a flash of something soft, almost like guilt, crossed her icy features. My name is Victoria Sterling, she said quietly. Chloe's heart stopped beating. The world seemed to tilt violently on its axis. Sterling. As in Sterling Corporation. As in the building she had run to that morning. As in the CEO of the most powerful company in the city. You? Chloe breathed out, her eyes widening in horror. You're the CEO. You're Victoria Sterling. I am, Victoria confirmed, her voice gentle but firm. And this morning you sacrificed the most important interview of your life to pull me out of a storm drain. You ruined your clothes, you injured your hands, and you ran yourself into the ground, all to save a complete stranger. Chloe looked down at her hands, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and lingering heartbreak. It didn't matter anyway. Your receptionist made it very clear that I wasn't welcome. Richard, Victoria said, the name sounding like poison on her tongue. Richard is no longer an employee of my company. I fired him this afternoon. Chloe's head snapped up in shock. You fired him? Because of me. I fired him because he is a fool who lacks basic human empathy, Victoria corrected, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective intensity. I watched the lobby security footage, Chloe. I saw how he treated you. And when I read your file, when I saw the jobs you were working, the neighborhood you live in, and the desperation with which you begged for just 5 minutes of his time, I realized the magnitude of what you gave up for me. Victoria leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them. The intense focus in her ice-blue eyes made Chloe feel like she was the only person in the entire world. I don't like owing debts, Miss Adams. But more importantly, I don't let exceptional talent slip through my fingers. You have a brilliant academic record, a fierce drive, and a level of integrity that I have rarely seen in my industry. The junior marketing executive position you applied for? Victoria paused, her gaze dropping briefly to Chloe's lips before locking onto her eyes again. It's gone. Chloe felt a heavy stone drop in her stomach. Of course. It was too late. Because, Victoria continued smoothly, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her mouth, that position is beneath you. I am offering you the role of my personal executive marketing liaison. You will work directly under me. Your starting salary will be triple what the junior position offered, complete with our platinum healthcare package, effective immediately. Chloe stopped breathing. Her mind blanked completely. Triple the salary? Platinum healthcare? It was everything she needed to save Grace. It was the answer to every prayer she had whispered in the dark for the last year. It was a miracle. I don't know what to say, Chloe stammered, tears springing to her eyes, blurring the image of the beautiful, powerful woman across from her. Are you serious? You're giving me a job because I helped you. I am giving you a job because you have character, Chloe, Victoria said softly, her voice dropping to a low, intimate register that sent a shiver straight down Chloe's spine. The business world is full of sharks and opportunists. I can teach you the marketing strategies. I can teach you the corporate game. But I cannot teach someone how to care. You possess something incredibly rare. I want that kind of loyalty in my corner. Slowly, carefully, Victoria reached across the table. Her cool, soft fingers gently covered Chloe's scraped, trembling hand. Touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure heat straight to Chloe's chest. Chloe gasped softly, looking down at their joined hands and then back up into Victoria's mesmerizing eyes. "Say yes, Chloe," Victoria murmured, her thumb lightly brushing against Chloe's uninjured skin. It was a command wrapped in a plea. "Yes," Chloe whispered, unable to look away. "Yes, I'll take it." Victoria's icy facade melted completely, replaced by a breathtaking, genuine smile that made Chloe's heart do a violent flip. She withdrew her hands slowly, leaving Chloe's skin tingling with the ghost of her touch. "Daniel will email you the contract and the details tonight," Victoria said, her professional armor slipping back into place, though her eyes remained warm. "Quit this diner. Go home and get some rest. I expect to see you on the top floor of the Sterling building on Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp." "And Chloe?" "Yes, Miss Sterling." "Victoria," she corrected smoothly, turning her wheelchair toward the door. "When it's just the two of us, I prefer Victoria." The weekend passed in a dizzying blur of tears, laughter, and overwhelming relief. When Chloe went home that night and told Grace the truth about the ruined suit, the canceled interview, and the miraculous appearance of Victoria Sterling in the diner, her grandmother had wept with joy, holding Chloe tightly. Platinum health insurance meant Grace could finally be transferred to a private specialist. Crushing weight of survival had suddenly been lifted off their shoulders. But beneath the relief, Chloe couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved her. She spent the entire weekend replaying the diner conversation in her head. The smell of cedarwood. The intense, piercing blue of Victoria's eyes. The shocking, electric warmth of her hand across the sticky diner table. Chloe had never been drawn to someone so instantly, so magnetically. Terrified her, and it thrilled her. Monday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, a sharp contrast to the storm that had brought them together. Chloe stepped out of the elevator onto the 60th floor, the executive penthouse of Sterling Corporation. She was wearing a new, sharp charcoal pantsuit she had bought over the weekend. She felt nervous, her stomach tying itself in intricate knots, but as she walked across the polished marble floors, she held her head high. "Good morning, Miss Adams," Daniel greeted her from his sleek desk, offering a rare, polite smile. "Welcome to Sterling Corporation. Miss Sterling is expecting you." Chloe took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass doors to Victoria's office. The room was bathed in morning sunlight, the sprawling city skyline serving as a breathtaking backdrop. Victoria was at her desk, dressed in a stunning navy blazer, looking over a digital tablet. When she heard the door close, she looked up and the world seemed to stop spinning. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the massive office grew incredibly thick with unsaid words, racing pulses, and an undeniable magnetic pull. Victoria's eyes slowly dragged down the length of Chloe's new suit, an unmistakable flash of appreciation burning in her gaze before she met Chloe's eyes once more. "You're exactly on time," Victoria said, her voice a low, velvety purr that made the hairs on Chloe's arms stand up. "I told you," Chloe replied, stepping deeper into the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I'm never late." End of Part 3. Part 4. The first 3 weeks at Sterling Corp felt like trying to drink from a fire hose. Chloe was thrust into a world of high-stakes corporate warfare, where million-dollar deals were made over espresso and entire departments could be dismantled with a single sharp word from the CEO. She quickly learned exactly why the industry had crowned Victoria the Ice Queen. Victoria was relentless, demanding absolute perfection from everyone around her. She didn't tolerate laziness, she despised excuses, and her ability to spot a flaw in a 100-page marketing proposal was nothing short of terrifying. Yet, for all her icy demands, Victoria was entirely different when the heavy glass doors of the executive suite closed, leaving just the two of them alone. With Chloe, the armor cracked. The sharp edges of the CEO softened into something remarkably gentle. Victoria was a patient teacher, spending hours explaining the intricacies of their ad campaigns, guiding Chloe through the complex web of corporate politics. She never treated Chloe like a charity case or a mere assistant. She treated her like an equal, a protégé whose mind she genuinely valued. And Chloe thrived. With the crushing weight of her grandmother's medical bills finally lifted, Grace was currently receiving the best care in the state and already regaining her strength. Chloe poured every ounce of her energy into proving Victoria right. She arrived early, left late, and devoured every piece of market research she could get her hands on. But as the days bled into weeks, Chloe found herself battling a completely different kind of distraction. It was the way Victoria looked at her during long board meetings, those intense ice-blue eyes cutting through a room of 50 executives just to find her. It was the intoxicating smell of cedarwood that lingered in the air whenever Victoria wheeled past her desk. It was the accidental brushes of their hands over shared documents, sending sparks of electricity straight up Chloe's arm and leaving her breathless and flushed. Chloe was falling, rapidly and helplessly, for the most powerful woman she had ever met. Tension finally boiled over on a rainy Thursday night in late October. Sterling Corp was in a state of absolute panic. The Vanguard account, a multinational tech conglomerate worth tens of millions of dollars in advertising revenue, was threatening to pull their contract. Vanguard's new demographic was young, working-class professionals, and Sterling Corp's senior marketing team, composed entirely of wealthy, out-of-touch executives, kept pitching sleek, elitist campaigns that felt painfully hollow. By 9 p.m., the entire executive floor was empty, save for the faint glow spilling from the open doors of Victoria's office. Chloe walked in, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. The massive office was dark, lit only by the glowing city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows and the dim desk lamp. Victoria was parked by the glass, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. She had discarded her blazer hours ago. Her silk white blouse was unbuttoned at the collar, and her dark hair was slightly tousled, as if she had been running her hands through it in frustration. "Daniel went home," Chloe said softly, stepping onto the plush carpet. "It's just us." Victoria slowly turned her wheelchair around. She looked exhausted, the shadows under her eyes prominent in the dim light, but she was still so breathtakingly beautiful that Chloe's heart performed a familiar, erratic stutter. "They're going to walk, Chloe," Victoria said, her voice lacking its usual commanding edge. It was rare to hear her sound so defeated. "Vanguard is going to walk." The board pitched them a lifestyle campaign today that practically reeked of trust funds and country clubs. It was a disaster. "If we lose this account, our stock takes a massive hit before the quarter ends." Chloe walked over to the desk, setting down the coffees. She didn't go back to her own chair. Instead, she moved around the heavy mahogany desk and leaned against the edge of it, crossing her arms as she looked down at Victoria. "They walked away from the pitch," Chloe said thoughtfully, "because your senior VPs don't know what it's like to actually need Vanguard's product. They don't know what it's like to take the subway at 5 a.m. or work a double shift or count pennies to pay for heating." Victoria looked up, her gaze locking onto Chloe's. "And you do." "I do," Chloe nodded. She reached over, pulling the massive Vanguard file toward her. Vanguard sells affordable, durable tech. Laptops for college students working night jobs. Phones with batteries that last through a 12-hour shift at a diner. Campaigns shouldn't be about looking rich or successful. It should be about grit. It should be about the people who hold the city together while the rest of the world is sleeping. Victoria was entirely silent. Her eyes, usually so cold and unreadable, were burning with a sudden, intense fire. She rolled her chair an inch closer, the wheels gliding silently over the carpet until she was positioned directly in front of where Chloe was leaning against the desk. "Show me," Victoria commanded, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. For the next 2 hours, the massive executive office transformed into a war room. They spread the campaign files across the polished mahogany. Chloe sketched out mock-ups on a notepad, her words tumbling out with passionate, undeniable conviction. She pulled from her own life, the exhaustion, the hustle, the quiet dignity of working-class survival. She outlined a raw, authentic narrative that didn't just sell a product but validated the struggles of the people buying it. As Chloe spoke, she realized Victoria had stopped looking at the files altogether. Victoria was looking solely at her. "And if we center the ad around that concept," Chloe finished, slightly out of breath, her cheeks flushed with adrenaline. I think it could save the account." The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the heavy rain lashing against the glass windows. Victoria slowly reached out. She didn't reach for the notepad or the pen. Instead, her long, elegant fingers lightly grazed the side of Chloe's waist, her thumb resting just above the curve of Chloe's hip. The touch was completely unexpected, sending a jolt of pure, white-hot heat straight through Chloe's body. Chloe's breath hitched audibly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk to steady herself. "You are extraordinary," Victoria breathed, her eyes dark and endlessly deep as they searched Chloe's face. "Do you know that, Chloe? My entire board of Ivy League executives couldn't crack this in 3 months. You did it in 2 hours over lukewarm coffee. I just know the reality they're trying to sell," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. She couldn't move away. She didn't want to. Victoria's hand on her waist felt like a brand, grounding her, pulling her in. "It's more than that," Victoria murmured, rolling her chair just a fraction closer. She was so close now that Chloe could feel the warmth radiating from her, could see the faint pulse fluttering at the base of Victoria's throat. "It's your heart. You pour it into everything you do. It's the most captivating thing I have ever witnessed." Chloe looked down into those ice-blue eyes, and for a terrifying, exhilarating second, all the professional boundaries they had carefully constructed seemed to evaporate into thin air. Victoria was looking at her not as a boss looking at an employee, but as a woman looking at someone she desperately wanted. Slowly, giving Chloe every opportunity to pull away, Victoria lifted her other hand. Her cool fingertips brushed a stray lock of dark blonde hair behind Chloe's ear. Caress was incredibly tender, a stark contrast to the ruthless CEO the rest of the world saw. Chloe's eyes fluttered shut at the contact, a soft, involuntary sigh escaping her lips. "Victoria," Chloe breathed, the name slipping out like a prayer. "I told myself I wouldn't do this," Victoria whispered, her thumb gently tracing the line of Chloe's jaw. "I told myself you are my employee, that you are young, that you are whole and I am confined to this chair, that it wouldn't be fair to you." Chloe's eyes snapped open, a fierce surge of protectiveness flooding her chest. Without thinking, she reached up, her own hands cupping Victoria's face. The CEO's skin was incredibly soft, and she leaned into Chloe's touch almost instinctively, a quiet vulnerability cracking her icy facade completely wide open. "Don't ever say that," Chloe said fiercely, her thumbs brushing across Victoria's cheekbones. "Don't you ever diminish yourself like that. You are the strongest, most brilliant, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Your chair doesn't change a single thing about how I see you." Victoria let out a shaky breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a woman who controlled empires, she looked entirely undone by a simple touch from a girl from Queens. The space between them was practically non-existent. Chloe could feel Victoria's breath against her lips. The magnetic pull was overwhelming, gravity itself demanding that they bridge the final inch. Chloe leaned down, her heart hammering wildly, entirely consumed by the intoxicating scent of cedarwood and the desperate heat in Victoria's gaze. Suddenly, the sharp, shrill ringing of the office landline shattered the silence. They both jumped, tearing apart as if they had been burned. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, taking a ragged breath to compose herself, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Chloe spun around, her chest heaving, staring blindly at the blinking red light on the phone. Victoria cleared her throat, her voice returning to its smooth, authoritative cadence, though it remained slightly husky. She pressed the speaker button. Yes. Apologies for the late intrusion, Miss Sterling, Daniel's voice filtered through the speaker. I just received an email from Vanguard's team. The CEO has requested an emergency dinner meeting tomorrow night at the Crystal Room. They want our final pitch before they officially withdraw. Victoria stared at Chloe, her chest still rising and falling rapidly. The professional armor was snapping back into place, but the raw, electric desire in her eyes remained. Tell them we will be there, Victoria said without breaking eye contact with Chloe. And Daniel? Yes, ma'am. Inform the Crystal Room to update the reservation, Victoria ordered softly. My executive liaison will be joining me as my +1. Chloe swallowed hard, a thrill of anticipation shooting down her spine as the line clicked dead. The Vanguard account was on the line, but as Victoria looked at her, Chloe knew they were about to step into territory far more dangerous and thrilling than any corporate boardroom. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Crystal Room. Friday afternoon arrived with a frenetic energy that buzzed through the entire executive floor of Sterling Corporation. The looming Vanguard dinner hung over the office like a dark cloud. If they lost the account, heads would roll and the stock would plummet. But sitting at her desk just outside the CEO's office, Chloe's anxiety wasn't solely focused on the multi-million-dollar pitch. Her mind was helplessly anchored to the memory of Victoria's hand on her waist, the intoxicating scent of cedarwood, and the desperate, heavy breath shared between them before the phone rang. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw ice-blue eyes looking at her with an intensity that made her entire body burn. 3 p.m., Daniel walked over to Chloe's desk, carrying a massive, sleek black box tied with a satin ribbon. He placed it carefully in front of her. From Ms. Sterling, Daniel said smoothly, not betraying a single emotion. She suggested you might need this for tonight. The Crystal Room has a notoriously strict dress code. Chloe waited until Daniel retreated before untying the ribbon with trembling fingers. She lifted the lid and parted the dark tissue paper. Inside lay the most breathtaking evening gown Chloe had ever seen. It was a deep, rich emerald green silk that felt like liquid between her fingers, elegantly draped with a tasteful slit and a delicate off-the-shoulder neckline. Resting on top of the fabric was a heavy, cream-colored cardstock note written in sharp, elegant handwriting. You need armor for tonight. And I have a feeling green is your color. V. Chloe's heart did a violent, soaring flip. It wasn't just a dress, it was a silent promise. It was Victoria saying, I see you and you belong here. 3 hours later, Chloe stepped out of a black town car and onto the cobblestone driveway of the Crystal Room. The restaurant was the epitome of Manhattan elite. A sprawling, historic mansion converted into a dining room dripping with crystal chandeliers, velvet drapery, and the quiet, hushed murmurs of the city's billionaires. Chloe's hands were shaking as she handed her coat to the maitre d'. The emerald gown fit her like a second skin, accentuating curves she didn't know she had, and she had twisted her dark blonde hair into an elegant updo, leaving a few soft tendrils to frame her face. She walked into the main dining room and immediately the air left her lungs. Victoria was already there, situated at a private, secluded table near the back of the room, flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. Victoria was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo jacket with sharp silk lapels over a crisp white blouse, the collar open just enough to reveal the delicate line of her collarbone. She looked powerful, dangerous, and devastatingly beautiful. As Chloe approached, Victoria looked up from the menu. Her ice-blue eyes locked onto Chloe, and for a split second, the Ice Queen completely shattered. Victoria's gaze dragged slowly, almost agonizingly, down the length of the emerald gown, drinking in the sight of Chloe. Pulse at the base of Victoria's throat jumped visibly. When she finally met Chloe's eyes again, the sheer heat and hunger in her expression made Chloe's knees feel dangerously weak. Good evening, Victoria, Chloe breathed, taking the seat across from her. I was right, Victoria murmured, her voice a low, husky whisper that barely carried over the ambient classical music. Green is absolutely your color. You look stunning, Chloe. Breathtaking. Thank you, Chloe said, a deep blush rushing to her cheeks. And thank you for the dress. I felt entirely out of my depth until I put it on. You are never out of your depth, Victoria corrected firmly, leaning forward. The scent of bergamot and cedarwood enveloped Chloe, instantly grounding her. Tonight, you are the smartest person in this room. Remember what we talked about. Trust your instincts. Before Chloe could reply, the maitre d' approached, leading a tall, stern-looking man in his late 50s. Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Vanguard. He looked displeased, his jaw set tightly as he sat down at their table. Victoria, Marcus greeted curtly, barely sparing a glance at Chloe. I'll be honest. I only agreed to this dinner out of respect for your late father. But my board is done. Your team has pitched us 3 campaigns that look like luxury perfume commercials. Vanguard makes technology for the working class. Your people don't understand our demographic. Victoria didn't flinch. She simply took a slow, elegant sip of her sparkling water, her face settling into a mask of pure, absolute authority. You are entirely correct, Marcus, Victoria said smoothly, setting her glass down. My senior executives are out of touch. They haven't had to worry about the battery life on a phone during a double shift in 20 years. They don't know your demographic. Victoria paused, turning her piercing gaze toward Chloe. But she does. Marcus, I'd like to introduce my executive marketing liaison, Chloe Adams. She is the architect behind the campaign you are going to launch next quarter. Marcus raised a skeptical eyebrow, finally looking at Chloe. Is that so? You look a bit young to be saving a $50 million account, Miss Adams. Chloe's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but as she looked at Victoria, she saw nothing but absolute, unwavering belief. Victoria was handing her the keys to the kingdom. She just had to drive. Chloe sat up straighter, channeling every ounce of grit she had learned on the streets of Queens. I am young, Mr. Thorne, Chloe said, her voice steady and clear. But until 3 weeks ago, I was working 2 jobs, serving coffee at 5 in the morning and waiting tables at a diner until midnight, just to pay for my grandmother's medical bills. I know your demographic because I am your demographic. Marcus stopped reaching for his water glass. He stared at her, suddenly entirely focused. Vanguard isn't a luxury brand, Chloe continued, leaning forward, the passion bleeding into her words. It's a lifeline. When a college student is writing their final paper on a subway train at 2 in the morning, they aren't thinking about how sleek their laptop looks. They are praying the battery holds out because if it dies, they fail, and if they fail, they lose their scholarship. Your current ads show people smiling in bright, sunny coffee shops. That's fake. And what is real, Miss Adams? Marcus asked, his voice dropping, completely captivated. Grit, Chloe said fiercely. Show the tired mother checking her Vanguard phone on her night shift to see a picture of her sleeping kids. Show the exhausted student. Show the mud, the rain, the late nights. Don't sell them a lifestyle they can't afford. Validate the hustle they are already living. Tell them that Vanguard is the armor they need to survive the city. You don't need to look rich to be resilient. Silence fell over the table. Marcus stared at Chloe for a long, heavy minute. He looked back at Victoria, who was sitting perfectly still, though the fierce pride radiating from her eyes was unmistakable. A slow, genuine smile spread across Marcus's weathered face. Grit, he repeated softly. He chuckled, reaching for his wine glass. Victoria, you always were a shark. Where did you find her? She found me, Victoria said softly, her eyes never leaving Chloe. Draft the contracts, Marcus said, raising his glass. We'll run the Grit campaign. You saved your account, Victoria. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of victorious adrenaline. Chloe expertly answered Marcus's technical questions, her confidence soaring with every passing minute. By the time they walked Marcus out to his waiting car, the multi-million-dollar crisis had been completely averted. As the taillights of Marcus's car disappeared into the Manhattan traffic, Chloe let out a massive breath, her shoulders dropping in sheer relief. She turned to look at Victoria, who was positioned near the grand entrance of the restaurant, waiting for her modified luxury SUV to pull up. "You did it," Victoria said softly, the cool night air whipping a dark strand of hair across her cheek. "You were magnificent, Chloe." "We did it," Chloe corrected, walking closer. "I just said what we talked about last night." The heavy black SUV pulled smoothly to the curb. Daniel stepped out, opening the rear door, extending a small, automated ramp. Victoria wheeled herself inside with practiced ease, and Chloe climbed in after her. The interior of the car was spacious and impossibly luxurious, separated from the driver's cabin by a thick, soundproof privacy partition. As the door clicked shut, sealing them inside a quiet, intimate cocoon, the adrenaline of the corporate victory began to fade, instantly replaced by the heavy, suffocating tension that had been entirely unresolved since the night before. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, casting flickering shadows over Victoria's face. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were entirely awake, tracking Chloe's every movement. "I couldn't stop looking at you during dinner," Victoria confessed, her voice dropping to a raw, ragged whisper in the quiet car. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing against the silk of Chloe's emerald dress, resting warmly on Chloe's knee. "When you were speaking to Marcus, the fire in your eyes. I have never been so completely mesmerized by anyone in my entire life." Chloe's breath caught in her throat. The physical distance between them in the wide back seat suddenly felt unbearable. She reached down, her trembling hand covering Victoria's. "Victoria," Chloe whispered, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "I am terrified of ruining this," Victoria breathed, her icy facade breaking completely, leaving behind a beautiful, vulnerable truth. "I am terrified of compromising you. But Chloe, I have been dying to do this since the moment you looked up at me in the rain." Chloe didn't wait for another word. She unbuckled her seatbelt and shifted across the leather seat, closing the remaining distance between them. She reached up, her hands tangling in the soft, dark hair at the nape of Victoria's neck, and pulled her in. Kiss was explosive. It wasn't hesitant or polite. It was years of Victoria's guarded isolation colliding with Chloe's fierce, protective warmth. Victoria gasped into the kiss, her hands coming up to grip Chloe's waist, pulling her impossibly closer. Chloe's lips were soft, demanding, and incredibly desperate, pouring every ounce of her gratitude, admiration, and overwhelming desire into the contact. Victoria kissed her back with a hunger that stole all the oxygen from the car. She tasted like expensive wine and mint, her thumbs tracing the bare skin of Chloe's shoulders, making Chloe shiver violently despite the heat radiating between them. It was a kiss that shattered the boss-employee dynamic forever, erasing the boardroom, the company, and the rest of the world, leaving only the intoxicating reality of the two of them. When they finally broke apart, entirely breathless, their foreheads rested against one another. Chloe's eyes were closed, her chest heaving as she kept her hands anchored gently to the sides of Victoria's face. "You're not ruining anything," Chloe whispered fiercely into the quiet space between them. "You're giving me everything." Victoria let out a shaky, beautiful laugh, her arms wrapping securely around Chloe's waist, holding her close as the car sped through the night. The Ice Queen had finally melted, and Chloe knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same again. End of Part 5. Part 6. The transition from the intoxicating heat of the weekend to the sterile, high-stakes environment of Sterling Corp on Monday morning was enough to give anyone whiplash. Chloe walked out of the elevator onto the 60th floor, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. She was wearing a tailored maroon blazer and a sharp pencil skirt, looking every inch the rising corporate star. But beneath the professional exterior, her skin still tingled with the ghost of Victoria's touch. They had spent the entire weekend hidden away in Victoria's sprawling, sun-drenched penthouse. It had been a revelation. Away from the prying eyes of the board and the relentless pressure of the industry, Victoria had shed her Ice Queen armor completely. They had ordered terrible takeout, watched old movies, and talked until their voices went hoarse. Chloe had learned about the crushing weight of Victoria's grief after her parents' accident, and in return, Victoria had listened with fierce, undivided attention as Chloe spoke about her fears for her grandmother. It was intimate, vulnerable, and entirely consuming. But as Chloe approached her desk just outside the CEO's heavy glass doors, the reality of their situation settled heavily over her shoulders. They were back in the Shark Tank. And in this world, Victoria Sterling belonged to the company. "Good morning, Miss Adams," Daniel said, looking up from his dual monitors. His expression was as meticulously blank as ever, though Chloe caught a microsecond of warmth in his eyes. "The senior marketing executives are already gathering in conference room A. Ms. Sterling requested that you join them immediately. The Vanguard campaign officially begins production today." "Thank you, Daniel." "Is she already in there?" Chloe asked, keeping her voice perfectly even. "She is preparing. She will join in 5 minutes. I suggest you secure a seat." Chloe nodded, taking a deep breath to steady her racing heart, and walked down the long, polished hallway toward the main conference room. When she pushed open the heavy oak doors, the atmosphere inside was thick with tension. A dozen senior vice presidents and marketing directors were already seated around the massive obsidian table, murmuring in hushed, agitated tones. These were men and women with Ivy League pedigrees, decades of experience, and egos the size of Manhattan. The moment Chloe walked in, the murmuring stopped abruptly. A dozen pairs of cold, assessing eyes locked onto her. She could practically feel the resentment radiating from them. She had done what they couldn't, she had saved the Vanguard account, and they despised her for it. Chloe kept her chin high, refusing to shrink under their collective glare, and took an empty seat near the center of the table. "Well, if it isn't the prodigy," a slick, condescending voice echoed from the head of the table. Chloe looked up to see Harrison Vance, the senior VP of marketing, leaning back in his leather chair. Harrison was a man in his early 40s, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Chloe's rent for a year. He had been the lead on the failed Vanguard pitches, and his pride was visibly wounded. "Good morning, Harrison," Chloe said politely, opening her tablet. Harrison let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I have to admit, Adams, it was a clever trick you pulled on Friday. Wearing a nice dress, batting your eyelashes at Marcus Thorne, and feeding him some sob story about the working class. Makes for good theater. But running a $50 million national ad campaign requires actual logistics, not just a bleeding heart." Several of the other directors smirked, shifting comfortably in their seats as Harrison continued to talk down to her. "We'll be taking over the grit concept from here," Harrison stated, waving a dismissive hand. "You had your moment in the spotlight. I'll have my team draft a watered-down version of your pitch so Vanguard feels heard, and we'll plug our usual A-list actors into the roles. You can go back to fetching Victoria's coffee." Chloe's grip on her tablet tightened until her knuckles turned white. A hot flare of anger ignited in her chest, but before she could formulate a sharp enough response, the heavy oak doors swung open. Temperature in the room instantly plummeted. Victoria wheeled herself into the conference room, the absolute picture of terrifying corporate authority. She wore a sharp charcoal gray pinstripe suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. The silence in the room was immediate and absolute. Every executive sat up straighter, their previous arrogance vanishing like smoke. Victoria didn't say a word as she moved to the head of the table, directly opposite Harrison. Her piercing ice-blue eyes swept over the room, cold and calculating, before finally landing on Chloe. For a fraction of a second, so fast no one else could possibly catch it, the ice melted. A rush of pure, possessive heat flared in Victoria's gaze, sending a sudden thrill straight down Chloe's spine. Then the mask snapped back into place. "Good morning," Victoria said, her voice smooth, rich, and dangerously quiet. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. As you all know, Sterling Corp retained the Vanguard account on Friday night. A catastrophic failure on the part of this senior team was narrowly avoided." Harrison shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Victoria, we were just discussing the transition. My team is ready to take Miss Adams' preliminary concept and elevate it to our standard production level. Victoria's gaze slowly dragged toward Harrison. The sheer contempt in her eyes made the hair on the back of Chloe's neck stand up. You will do no such thing, Harrison, Victoria stated, her tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. The Grit campaign is not a preliminary concept. It is the finalized strategy. Vanguard did not buy a watered-down version of our usual elitist garbage. They bought authenticity. And since none of you possess the slightest understanding of that demographic, none of you will be leading this project. Collective, shocked gasp rippled through the room. Harrison's face turned a mottled shade of red. Victoria, you cannot be serious. It's a $50 million account. Who is going to run the production? We need a veteran. The architect of the campaign will run the production, Victoria said, looking directly at Chloe. Chloe Adams is the lead project manager for Vanguard, effective immediately. Every department, from casting to post-production, reports directly to her. And she reports exclusively to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Lead project manager? It was a role that took a decade to earn. Promotion was astronomical, and the trust Victoria was placing in her in front of the entire company was staggering. She is 24 years old and she used to wait tables. Harrison exploded, losing his composure entirely. Victoria, this is corporate suicide. The board will have a stroke. Let the board have a stroke, Victoria replied coldly, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I am the CEO of this company, Harrison. I dragged this firm out of the ashes, and I know exactly what I am doing. If you have an issue taking directives from Miss Adams, I can have HR prepare your severance package by noon. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Harrison swallowed hard, his face pale. The fight completely drained out of him. Crystal clear, Ms. Sterling. Excellent. The meeting is adjourned. Chloe, stay behind. We have logistics to discuss. The executives practically scrambled over each other to leave the room, their briefcases snapping shut in a frantic chorus. Harrison shot Chloe a look of pure, unadulterated venom before he walked out, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind him. The moment they were completely alone, the oppressive atmosphere in the boardroom vanished. Victoria let out a soft sigh, rolling her chair away from the head of the table and moving closer to where Chloe was sitting. Cold, calculating CEO disappeared, replaced by the woman who had kissed her breathless in the back of an SUV. Are you all right? Victoria asked, her voice softening into a velvety, intimate register. She reached out beneath the table, her long fingers gently wrapping around Chloe's wrist, her thumb tracing the erratic pulse there. Lead project manager? Chloe breathed, her eyes wide as she looked at Victoria. Victoria, they are going to eat me alive. Harrison looked like he wanted to push me out a window. Harrison is a dinosaur and his teeth are dull, Victoria murmured, her thumb stroking the soft skin of Chloe's wrist, sending sparks of heat traveling up her arm. I meant every word I said, Chloe. This is your campaign. You earned this. I won't let them steal your credit just because they have better titles on their doors. But this is a massive risk for you, Chloe protested, leaning closer, captivated by the intense blue of Victoria's eyes. If I fail, the board will use it against you. They'll say you played favorites. Or worse, if they find out about us. Victoria's expression hardened with a fierce, protective resolve. She pulled Chloe's hand toward her, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the inside of Chloe's palm. The gesture was so tender, so completely devoted that Chloe's breath hitched in her throat. I don't care about the board, Victoria whispered against her skin. I care about you. You have a brilliant mind, Chloe, and I am going to make sure the entire industry knows it. As for us, they won't find out until we are ready. But I will not hide your talent in the shadows just to appease a room full of insecure men. Chloe felt a profound, overwhelming wave of love crash over her. She looked at Victoria, seeing the absolute conviction in her beautiful face. Victoria wasn't just giving her a job, she was giving her a platform, a voice, and a chance to truly change her life. "Okay," Chloe whispered fiercely, her fingers curling around Victoria's hand. "Okay. I'll do it. I'll run the campaign, and I'll make it the most successful launch this company has ever seen. I won't let you down, Victoria." A slow, devastatingly attractive smile spread across Victoria's lips. "I know you won't, my brave girl. Now we need to finalize the casting choices for the commercial shoots. And tonight, after everyone leaves," Victoria's voice dropped an octave, dripping with raw, magnetic promise, "I am taking you out to celebrate. Properly." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of frantic productivity. Chloe moved into a larger glass office down the hall from Victoria's suite. She was bombarded with casting portfolios, budget spreadsheets, and location scouting reports. True to Victoria's word, the departments reported to her, though many of the senior staff did so with thinly veiled skepticism. Chloe ignored their whispers. She channeled her grandmother's resilience, working with a relentless focus. She rejected the glossy, high-fashion models the casting department suggested and instead demanded real people, actors with character, lines on their faces, and exhaustion in their eyes. By 8 p.m., the executive floor was nearly deserted. Chloe was standing in front of a massive whiteboard in her new office, circling headshots with a red marker, entirely lost in her thoughts. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching until the shadow fell across her open doorway. She turned around, expecting to see Daniel or Victoria. Instead, Harrison Vance was standing in the doorway. The charming veneer he usually wore for the board was completely gone, replaced by a dark, calculating sneer. "Working late, Miss Adams?" Harrison asked smoothly, stepping into her office without being invited. He closed the glass door behind him, plunging the room into an unsettling, isolated quiet. "Just finalizing the casting, Harrison," Chloe said, keeping her voice steady, refusing to show the sudden spike of adrenaline in her chest. "Is there something you need?" "The project files are all updated on the server." Harrison walked slowly toward her desk, running his hand over the expensive leather chair. "I don't need project files. I just came to give you a piece of friendly advice." He stopped a few feet away, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. "You think you're invincible because the Ice Queen has taken a sudden, inexplicable liking to you. But I've known Victoria for a long time. She uses people to shake up the board, and when she's bored, she discards them." "Victoria doesn't discard talent," Chloe countered sharply, stepping away from the whiteboard. "If you have a professional concern about the Vanguard campaign, put it in an email. Otherwise, get out of my office." Harrison took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. "You're in way over your head, little girl. This is the major leagues. If this campaign fails, it won't just be your head on the chopping block. The board is already looking for a reason to push Victoria out. They think her condition makes her weak. A $50 million loss would be the perfect excuse to vote her out of her own company." Chloe's blood ran cold. The threat wasn't just to her career, it was aimed directly at Victoria's legacy. "So watch your back, Adams," Harrison smiled, a cold, empty expression. "Because the higher you climb, the harder the fall is going to be. And I'll be right there to watch you shatter." Harrison turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door wide open. Chloe stood frozen in the quiet room, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. The stakes had just multiplied. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore or paying medical bills. This was a war for control of Sterling Corp, and Harrison Vance had just drawn the battle lines. If she failed, she wouldn't just lose her job. She would take the woman she loved down with her. End of Part 6. Part 7. Chloe stood frozen in her new glass office, the echo of Harrison Vance's venomous words ringing in her ears long after he had disappeared down the hallway. The board is already looking for a reason to push Victoria out. A $50 million loss would be the perfect excuse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. The gravity of the situation settled over her like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just a corporate game anymore. Harrison and his faction of wealthy, fragile-egoed executives were actively plotting a coup against Victoria, using Chloe's unprecedented promotion as the catalyst. If the Vanguard campaign failed, they wouldn't just fire Chloe. They would use it to dethrone the Ice Queen entirely, weaponizing Victoria's disability and her bold leadership against her. Chloe looked at the whiteboard, covered in casting headshots and budget calculations. She took a deep, shaky breath, her jaw setting into a hard line of absolute determination. "I am not going to let you fall," Chloe whispered to the empty room. "Not for me. Not for anyone." She didn't tell Victoria about Harrison's threat. When Chloe finally walked into the CEO's suite 20 minutes later, she buried her anxiety beneath a bright, practiced smile. Victoria was waiting for her, bathed in the soft amber glow of the city lights pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The CEO had discarded her severe pinstripe jacket, the sleeves of her crisp white blouse rolled up to her elbows, revealing the elegant lines of her forearms. "Ready to get out of here?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to a low, intimate register the moment the heavy glass doors clicked shut behind Chloe. "More than ready," Chloe replied, walking over to the desk. The sheer magnetism of the woman in front of her made the corporate warfare feel miles away. Their proper celebration did not take place in a crowded, pretentious five-star restaurant. Instead, Victoria's driver took them to a private, secluded rooftop terrace that Victoria owned in Tribeca. High above the chaotic symphony of Manhattan, the terrace was a hidden oasis, surrounded by lush, manicured greenery and illuminated by dozens of flickering candles. A private chef had prepared a staggering multi-course meal, but the moment the food was served, the staff vanished, leaving them completely alone under the starry night sky. Crisp autumn air was kept at bay by towering patio heaters, creating a warm, intimate cocoon. Chloe sat across from Victoria, entirely mesmerized. The flickering candlelight danced across Victoria's sharp jawline and illuminated the piercing, icy blue of her eyes. "You're quiet tonight," Victoria observed softly, swirling a glass of dark red wine. Her gaze was incredibly perceptive, cutting straight through Chloe's defenses. "You just achieved the most meteoric rise in the history of Sterling Corporation. You should be practically buzzing with adrenaline. What's going on in that beautiful head of yours?" Chloe forced a small laugh, reaching across the table to gently trace the rim of her own wine glass. "I think the reality of being lead project manager is just setting in. The Vanguard shoot starts in 2 weeks. It's a lot of moving parts." Victoria set her glass down. She rolled her wheelchair around the small table until she was right beside Chloe. The scent of bergamot and cedarwood enveloped Chloe, instantly settling her racing pulse. Victoria reached out, her cool, soft fingers gently cupping Chloe's chin, tilting her face up so their eyes locked. "Look at me," Victoria murmured, her voice a velvety command. "Are you letting the board intimidate you? Because if Harrison or any of those dinosaurs so much as looked at you wrong today, I will have their access badges revoked by midnight." Chloe's breath hitched. The fierce, absolute protectiveness in Victoria's eyes was intoxicating. It took every ounce of Chloe's willpower not to spill Harrison's threat, but she knew Victoria was already fighting a war on a dozen fronts. Chloe refused to be a liability. She needed to be Victoria's armor. "No," Chloe whispered, her hand coming up to cover Victoria's. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes for a brief second. "Harrison is just noise. I want this to be perfect. For Vanguard, yes. But mostly for you. I want to prove to the entire world that you were right to bet on me." Victoria's expression softened completely, a breathtaking vulnerability melting the Ice Queen away. "Chloe, you don't have to prove anything to me. You already saved me. Twice." Before Chloe could ask what she meant, Victoria leaned in and kissed her. It was a slow, devastatingly tender kiss. taste of rich red wine and the cool night air mingled perfectly. Chloe's hands instinctively found their way to the nape of Victoria's neck, her fingers tangling in the dark, silky strands of her hair. Victoria let out a soft sigh, her arms wrapping securely around Chloe's waist, pulling her as close as the wheelchair would allow. Kiss deepened, growing desperate and heavy, erasing the company, the board, and the looming threat of the Vanguard campaign. In that moment, on a rooftop high above the world, they were untouchable. But the real world was waiting for them. The next 2 weeks were a grueling, relentless grind. The Grit campaign was a beast of a project, and Chloe ran it with a military precision that shocked the senior staff. She was on set by 4 a.m. every morning and didn't leave until past midnight. They were shooting the flagship commercial in a damp, authentic alleyway in the heart of Brooklyn, capturing the raw, unpolished reality of the city. Chloe was in her element, directing the crew, adjusting lighting, and coaching the actors. She wore a heavy black parka over a simple sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, completely devoid of the corporate glamour of the Sterling executive suite. But the sabotage began almost immediately. On the third night of shooting, the massive lighting rig suddenly lost power, plunging the entire set into darkness. Crew murmured in confusion. "What happened?" Chloe yelled into her walkie-talkie, pulling her flashlight from her pocket. "We blew the main generator, boss," the technical director's voice crackled back, sounding panicked. "And the backup generator we ordered wasn't delivered. The rental company said the purchase order was canceled this afternoon." Chloe's blood ran cold. Purchase order was canceled. Only a senior VP with high-level access could override a project budget order. Harrison. He was trying to delay the shoot, bleed their budget dry, and force Chloe to miss the Vanguard deadline. "Miss Adams, we're losing the actors," the assistant director whispered, approaching her in the dark. "If we wrap now, we lose $80,000 in location fees. We're dead in the water." Chloe gritted her teeth. The image of Victoria's proud, trusting face flashed in her mind. "I am not going to let you fall." "No, we are not wrapping," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the panic of the crew with absolute authority. "The entire concept of this campaign is grit. Vanguard phones have a revolutionary low-light camera feature. That's what we're selling, isn't it?" Crew stared at her, illuminated only by the faint glow of street lamps at the end of the alley. "Grab the prop phones," Chloe ordered, pointing at the camera operators. "Mount the actual Vanguard phones to the cinematic lenses. We are going to shoot this commercial entirely by the ambient light of the city and the flashlights of the extras. We don't need a polished lighting rig to show survival. We just need the product to work." Technical director hesitated. "Shoot a national commercial on a cell phone camera? The board will kill us." "I am the lead project manager," Chloe said fiercely, her eyes blazing in the dark. "And I say we shoot. Positions, everyone. We go in 5. The set erupted into a chaotic, brilliant flurry of motion. Chloe's improvisation injected a frantic, authentic adrenaline into the crew. They shot the scenes in the gritty, shadowy darkness, the Vanguard screens glowing brightly, illuminating the exhausted, determined faces of the actors perfectly. It was raw. It was breathtaking. It was exactly what Marcus Thorne had asked for. 2 a.m., as they were filming the final climactic shot of the commercial, a sleek, familiar black SUV pulled silently up to the edge of the blocked-off street. Chloe, staring intently at the director's monitor, didn't notice the arrival. But as the director yelled, "Cut! That's a wrap, people." "Beautiful work!" A wave of relief washed over her, so powerful her knees nearly buckled. "Incredible!" A rich, low voice murmured from the shadows behind her. Chloe spun around. Victoria was positioned at the edge of the video village, bundled in a luxurious black cashmere coat. The CEO's ice-blue eyes were fixed on the playback monitor, watching the raw, stunning footage Chloe had just directed in the dark. "Victoria!" Chloe gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. "What are you doing here?" "It's 2 in the morning. I am the CEO." I can visit my sets whenever I please, Victoria said smoothly, though the fierce, overwhelming pride in her gaze was meant entirely for Chloe. She rolled her wheelchair closer, lowering her voice so the bustling crew couldn't hear. Daniel told me about the generator sabotage. I was prepared to fire the entire logistics department. But it seems you didn't need me to. We adapted, Chloe whispered, stepping closer to the wheelchair, craving the warmth of Victoria's proximity in the freezing Brooklyn air. It looks better this way. It's real. You are incredible, Victoria breathed, her eyes tracing the exhausted, beautiful lines of Chloe's face. You outsmarted them all, Chloe. Vanguard is going to lose their minds over this footage. Crew began breaking down the equipment, loudly loading heavy cases into the production trucks. The alleyway was a chaotic mess of shouting grips and rolling cables. Seeking a moment of quiet, Chloe subtly gestured toward a dark, secluded alcove between two brick buildings, away from the glaring headlights of the trucks. Victoria understood instantly, maneuvering her chair effortlessly into the shadows. Chloe followed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The moment they were shielded from the crew by a stack of wooden shipping pallets, the professional distance evaporated. Chloe dropped to her knees on the cold concrete, bringing herself perfectly eye level with Victoria. She was so exhausted her bones ached, but looking at Victoria gave her a surge of pure, electric energy. I missed you today, Chloe confessed in a breathless whisper, her hands coming to rest on the armrests of Victoria's chair. I missed you every second, Victoria replied, her voice thick with emotion. She reached down, her bare hands cupping Chloe's freezing cheeks. Victoria's thumbs gently wiped away a smudge of dirt near Chloe's jawline. You are brilliant, my love. You are fighting a war for me, and you are winning. The endearment, my love, sent a shockwave of pure heat straight to Chloe's core. She couldn't hold back anymore. She leaned upward, capturing Victoria's lips in a desperate, passionate kiss. Victoria groaned softly, her hands sliding into Chloe's messy hair, pulling her impossibly closer. It was a kiss fueled by the adrenaline of the night, the stress of the sabotage, and the overwhelming, undeniable love they were desperately trying to keep hidden from the world. In the dark, secluded alcove, wrapped in Victoria's arms, Chloe felt entirely safe. She felt invincible. But they were not as hidden as they thought. 50 feet away, perched on the fire escape of the adjacent building, a figure cloaked in the shadows slowly lowered a high-end DSLR camera. The long telephoto lens retracted with a soft, mechanical whir. The digital screen on the back of the camera glowed brightly in the dark, displaying a razor-sharp, undeniable photograph of Chloe Adams on her knees, passionately kissing the CEO of Sterling Corp. A cruel, victorious smirk spread across Harrison Vance's face as he reviewed the image. He tapped the screen, saving the file to an encrypted server. Checkmate, Victoria, Harrison whispered into the cold night air. End of Part 7. Part 8, The Ambush. The screening room on the 58th floor of Sterling Corp was plunged into complete darkness. The only light emanated from the massive cinematic screen at the front, casting flickering, dramatic shadows over the faces of the most powerful executives in the city. Chloe stood silently in the back corner, her hands clammy, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Sitting in the front row was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Vanguard, flanked by his entire senior leadership team. Beside him sat Victoria, perfectly composed in a striking white blazer, her silhouette illuminated by the glow of the screen. They were watching the final cut of the Grit commercial. The screen displayed the raw, shadowy footage Chloe had directed in the freezing Brooklyn alleyway. Without the polished studio lighting, the Vanguard phone screen glowed like a beacon of hope in the darkness, highlighting the exhausted, beautiful resilience of the actors. The ambient city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a subway train, mixed with a slow, powerful cello score. It was gritty, authentic, and breathtakingly real. As the screen faded to black, displaying only the Vanguard logo and the tagline, "Your armor for the everyday," the room sat in stunned silence. For a terrifying 3 seconds, nobody moved. Chloe stopped breathing altogether. Then Marcus Thorne stood up. The imposing CEO turned around, facing the room, and began to clap. Slowly at first, and then with a fierce, booming enthusiasm. The rest of the Vanguard team immediately followed suit, and soon the screening room was echoing with thunderous applause. "Magnificent!" Marcus boomed, his voice carrying over the applause. He walked past the rows of seats, heading straight for the back corner where Chloe was standing. He extended a massive, calloused hand. "Miss Adams, you are a visionary. You didn't just sell our product, you captured the very soul of our company. This is going to be the most successful launch in Vanguard's history." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," Chloe breathed, shaking his hand, a massive wave of relief washing over her. The crew was incredible. We wanted it to feel as real as possible. "It's a masterpiece," Marcus declared, turning to Victoria, who had wheeled herself gracefully to the back of the room to join them. "Victoria, you were right to trust her. Your senior executives wanted to give me a country club commercial. Miss Adams gave me the streets. Vanguard is extending our contract with Sterling Corp for another 5 years. Send the paperwork to my legal team by Friday." Victoria's ice blue eyes gleamed with absolute triumph. "It will be on your desk tomorrow morning, Marcus." "Thank you." As the Vanguard team filtered out of the room, loudly celebrating their new campaign, the Sterling Corp executives lingered behind. They offered Chloe forced, tight-lipped congratulations, their smiles completely failing to reach their eyes. Chloe didn't care. She had done it. She had secured the $50 million account, guaranteed a 5-year extension, and protected Victoria's position as CEO. When the room finally emptied, leaving only the two of them, Victoria rolled her chair closer. Cold, corporate exterior melted instantly. "You did it," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with overwhelming pride. She reached out, her cool fingers lightly brushing against the back of Chloe's hand, shielded from the doorway by the dim lighting. "You saved the account. You saved my company." "We did it," Chloe smiled, her heart soaring. She wanted nothing more than to pull Victoria into her arms right there in the screening room, but the fear of being seen kept her anchored. "Tonight, my apartment. I'll cook you the cheapest, best celebratory dinner you've ever had." "I am holding you to that," Victoria murmured, a devastatingly attractive smirk playing on her lips. "I'll have Daniel clear my evening schedule." The victory felt absolute, impenetrable. But in the ruthless world of Sterling Corp, peace was only an illusion. The next morning, the atmosphere on the executive floor was suffocatingly tense. Chloe had just stepped out of the elevator at 8 a.m. when she noticed the unnatural quiet. The usual hum of ringing phones and frantic assistants was completely absent. Daniel met her halfway down the hall, his meticulously composed face looking unusually pale. "Daniel, what's going on?" Chloe asked, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "An emergency board meeting has been convened in conference room A," Daniel said in a low, urgent whisper. "Miss Sterling was not informed until 10 minutes ago. Harrison Vance called the vote. He requested your presence immediately." Cold knot twisted violently. "Harrison." Chloe didn't hesitate. She marched past Daniel and pushed open the heavy oak doors of conference room A. The massive obsidian table was completely full. The entire board of directors, 12 of the wealthiest, most influential shareholders in the company, were seated around it. The head of the table sat Victoria, her posture rigid, her face an unreadable mask of pure ice. Harrison Vance was standing near the massive digital projector screen at the far end of the room, looking like a cat that had just swallowed a canary. "Ah, Miss Adams," Harrison smiled, a slick, venomous expression. "How kind of you to join us. Please take a seat. We were just getting to the main event." Chloe took the only available chair, situated directly across from Victoria. The CEO's icy blue eyes locked onto Chloe, silently commanding her to stay calm, but Chloe could see the faint tension in Victoria's jaw. "What is the meaning of this ambush, Harrison?" Victoria demanded, her voice echoing through the silent room like a whip crack. You bypassed the CEO to call an emergency board vote on the morning of our biggest quarterly victory? Explain yourself, or security will physically remove you from this building. The victory is exactly what we need to discuss, Victoria, Harrison said smoothly, pacing in front of the screen. Vanguard is thrilled with the Grit campaign. They bought the narrative of authenticity, of hard work, of an honest hustle. But what happens to that $50 million contract when Vanguard realizes their entire campaign was built on a lie? Built on gross nepotism and a severe breach of corporate ethics? The board members murmured in confusion. Victoria didn't blink. Watch your next words very carefully, Harrison. Harrison sneered. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. The massive digital screen behind him flickered to life. Chloe stopped breathing. The air was violently sucked from her lungs, leaving her entirely paralyzed. Projected in high definition, 10 feet tall for the entire board to see, was the photograph from the Brooklyn alleyway. It was crystal clear. Chloe was on her knees on the cold concrete, her hands resting on the armrests of the silver wheelchair, locked in a desperate, passionate kiss with Victoria Sterling. Gasps erupted around the boardroom. Several directors recoiled, others stared in blatant shock. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the hum of the projector. Chloe felt the blood drain completely from her face. Her entire world was collapsing in real time. She looked frantically at Victoria. For the first time since Chloe had met her, the Ice Queen looked genuinely horrified. Victoria's knuckles were bone-white as she gripped the armrests of her chair, staring at the screen with a look of pure, unadulterated rage. "A beautiful moment, isn't it?" Harrison mocked, his voice dripping with triumphant poison. Taken on the set of the Vanguard commercial at 2 a.m. While the crew was packing up, our esteemed CEO was busy compensating her lead project manager in the shadows. "Turn that off," Victoria roared, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, primal fury. Harrison ignored her, turning to face the shocked board of directors. "Let's look at the facts." Chloe Adams, a 24-year-old waitress with zero corporate experience, is suddenly plucked from the streets and handed an executive salary. 3 weeks later, Victoria bypasses my entire senior team to hand this unqualified girl a $50 million national campaign. We all thought Victoria had lost her mind. But now we know the truth. She wasn't making a strategic business decision. She was playing favorites with her lover. "That is a lie," Chloe shouted, standing up from her chair, her whole body trembling with rage and terror. "I earned that campaign. I pitched the concept to Marcus Thorne myself." "Did you?" Harrison laughed coldly. "Or did Victoria feed you the pitch? How long has this been going on, Adams? Did you seduce the CEO to pay off those medical bills you were crying to Marcus about?" "Harrison, I swear to God I will destroy you," Victoria hissed, wheeling her chair forward. Her eyes were burning with a lethal fire. She looked ready to tear him apart with her bare hands. "No, Victoria, you are destroyed," Harrison yelled back, slamming his hand on the table. "This company cannot survive a scandal like this. Vanguard signed based on integrity. If this photo leaks to the press, if the world finds out the CEO of Sterling Corp is trading promotions for bedroom favors, Vanguard will cancel the contract instantly due to the morality clause. Our stock will plummet. The SEC will investigate us for corporate fraud." Harrison turned to the board. "I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. Victoria Sterling is unfit to lead this company. Her judgment is compromised. She must resign as CEO today, hand over control of the board to me, or I swear to you I will leak this photo to the Wall Street Journal in 1 hour and we will all lose everything." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Directors were shouting, demanding answers, expressing their outrage. Chloe stood frozen in the eye of the hurricane. The threat she had feared had come to life in the most devastating way possible. Harrison wasn't just taking her job. He was burning Victoria at the stake. If Victoria fought him, Harrison would leak the photo, and the scandal would destroy Victoria's reputation, ruin the Vanguard account, and tear apart the legacy Victoria's father had built. Victoria slammed her hand on the table, silencing the room. She turned her icy, lethal gaze to the board. I will not be blackmailed by a mediocre, bitter man who couldn't secure an account to save his life. My personal life is exactly that, personal. Chloe Adams earned her position through sheer brilliance. I will not resign, and if any of you try to force my hand, I will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. Victoria was going to fight. She was going to risk everything, her company, her legacy, her father's life's work, just to protect Chloe. Tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. She couldn't let Victoria do it. Victoria had saved her grandmother. Victoria had given her a life, a future, and a love so profound it had rewritten Chloe's entire soul. Chloe would not be the reason Victoria lost her empire. She didn't do anything wrong, Chloe yelled, her voice piercing through the boardroom, silencing the chaotic chatter. Every eye turned to Chloe. She took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing her spine to straighten. She refused to let them see her cry. Chloe, stop, Victoria warned, her voice suddenly laced with genuine panic. Do not say another word. I am handling this. No, Victoria. They need to hear the truth, Chloe said, looking directly at Harrison, her eyes cold and dead. She had to sell the lie. She had to fall on her sword so Victoria could survive. I manipulated her, Chloe announced to the silent room, the words tasting like poison and ash in her mouth. Harrison is right. I was a waitress drowning in medical debt. I figured out Victoria's schedule. I orchestrated the meeting in the diner. When she gave me a job, I realized I had access to the most powerful woman in the city. So I took advantage of it. Chloe, what are you doing? Victoria gasped, the color draining from her face as she stared at the girl she loved. I threw myself at her, Chloe continued, her voice trembling slightly, refusing to look at Victoria because she knew if she did, she would break completely. I kissed her in that alleyway. I initiated it. Victoria tried to push me away to keep it professional, but I cornered her. The Vanguard pitch was my idea, but I only got the position because I compromised her judgment. See, Harrison cheered triumphantly. A confession. Therefore, Chloe said loudly, her chest heaving, Victoria is not responsible for this breach of ethics. I am a predatory employee who took advantage of my superior. I resign my position at Sterling Corp, effective immediately. Furthermore, I will sign a binding non-disclosure agreement. This scandal dies right here in this room. The board members looked at each other, the tension suddenly shifting. If the predatory employee resigned and signed an NDA, the threat of scandal was neutralized. Victoria could remain CEO, and the Vanguard account was safe. Harrison's leverage had just vanished. You can't do this, Victoria yelled, her voice cracking in a way the board had never heard before. She wheeled her chair violently toward Chloe. I refuse your resignation. I refuse it. It's already done, Miss Sterling, Chloe said, finally turning to look at Victoria. The devastation in Victoria's ice-blue eyes was unbearable. She looked utterly shattered, betrayed, and desperately panicked. She reached out, trying to grab Chloe's hand, but Chloe took a step back, maintaining a professional distance in front of the board. Thank you for the opportunity, Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. I'll clear out my desk. Before Victoria could stop her, before Harrison could utter another venomous word, Chloe turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate and separating her from the only woman she had ever loved. End of Part 8. Part 9, The Ice Queen's Wrath. The walk from conference room A to her glass office felt like a death march. Chloe's legs moved mechanically, her vision blurred by the hot, stinging tears she refused to let fall while still on the executive floor. The vibrant, pulsating energy that had filled her veins just the night before was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, echoing numbness. She had done it. She had thrown herself on the sword. Victoria was safe, the company was safe, and Harrison's leverage had been completely neutralized. But it had cost Chloe her heart. She walked into her office, the office Victoria had proudly given her, and pulled a small cardboard box from the supply closet. Her hand shook violently as she began tossing her few personal items into it. Her favorite pens, the expensive leather notebook Victoria had gifted her, the spare pair of flats she kept under the desk. Every item felt like a physical blow to her chest. "You don't have to do this," a quiet, strained voice said from the doorway. Chloe looked up, hastily wiping a stray tear from her cheek. Daniel was standing there, his usually immaculate composure cracking. His hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides, and there was a profound sadness in his eyes. "I do, Daniel," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. She closed the lid of the box, leaning her weight against the desk because her knees felt dangerously weak. If I stayed, Harrison would have leaked that photo. The board would have used the morality clause to force her out. She would have lost everything she and her father built. I couldn't let my presence destroy her legacy. "Miss Sterling does not care about her legacy if it means losing you," Daniel said fiercely, stepping into the room. "She is in that boardroom right now, tearing it apart. I have worked for Victoria for 5 years, Miss Adams. I was with her through the accident. I was with her when she took over this company. I have never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you. You didn't just save her career. You brought her back to life." A fresh wave of tears cascaded down Chloe's face, a choked sob escaping her throat. Hearing the truth spoken aloud only made the sacrifice that much more agonizing. "And that is exactly why I have to leave," Chloe cried softly. "I love her, Daniel. I love her so much it physically hurts. And in this world, love is a liability she cannot afford right now. Please make sure she eats. Make sure she doesn't work until 3 in the morning every night." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding slowly, a deep look of respect crossing his features. "I will." Chloe picked up her box, giving her office one last lingering look before she walked past Daniel, down the long hallway, and stepped into the elevator. When the doors slid shut, sealing her away from Sterling Corp forever, she finally collapsed against the cool metal wall and sobbed. Meanwhile, inside Conference Room A, the atmosphere was not one of relief. It was an active war zone. The moment the heavy oak doors had clicked shut behind Chloe, a deathly, terrifying silence had fallen over the board. Harrison Vance let out a smug, victorious breath, turning back to face the table. "Well, that resolves the issue quite cleanly," Harrison declared, adjusting his expensive tie. "The predatory element has been removed, the scandal is contained, and the Vanguard account remains intact. I believe a motion to restructure the senior executive team, with myself taking over the Vanguard campaign, is now in order." Victoria sat perfectly still at the head of the table. Her head was bowed slightly, her dark hair casting shadows over her eyes. She didn't move. She didn't speak. The sheer, freezing intensity radiating from her was so palpable that the other board members began to shift uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. When Victoria finally slowly lifted her head, the look in her ice-blue eyes made Harrison's triumphant smile falter instantly. It wasn't the look of a defeated woman. It was the look of an apex predator that had just been unleashed. "Sit down, Harrison," Victoria commanded, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Victoria, the matter is settled." "I said sit down," Victoria roared, slamming both her hands onto the obsidian table with such ferocious force that several directors physically flinched. Harrison swallowed hard, his face paling, and slowly sank into the nearest chair. Victoria wheeled her chair back, creating a deliberate distance so she could look at every single person in the room. The Ice Queen had returned, but her ice was now burning with an uncontrollable, lethal fire. "You think you have won," Victoria said, her voice dripping with sheer, unadulterated venom. "You think you have cleverly outmaneuvered me by threatening the woman I love. Let me make something incredibly clear to every single one of you in this room. Chloe Adams did not manipulate me. She did not seduce me for a promotion. I pursued her. I fell in love with her brilliant mind, her flawless integrity, and her beautiful heart. And if I had my way, I would have kissed her in front of every camera in this city. Gasps rippled through the boardroom, but Victoria cut them off instantly. And as for this company's reputation, Victoria continued, pulling a sleek tablet from her jacket and tossing it onto the center of the table. You are all so concerned about the Vanguard contract. What Harrison failed to realize in his pathetic attempt at corporate espionage is that the contract Marcus Thorne signed this morning contains a keyman clause. A clause Marcus insisted upon himself. Harrison's eyes widened in sudden dawning horror. What did you do? The contract stipulates that the $50 million account is contingent upon Chloe Adams remaining as the lead project manager. Victoria smiled, a cold, ruthless expression that chilled the room to absolute zero. Marcus didn't buy the campaign from Sterling Corp. Harrison. He bought it from Chloe. With her resignation, the Vanguard contract is officially null and void. You didn't save the account. You just destroyed it. The board erupted in panic. Victoria, this is madness, one of the senior directors yelled. We will lose millions. We will lose everything, Victoria corrected smoothly, her eyes locking onto Harrison with predatory delight. Unless, of course, I reject her resignation and bring her back. But I will only do that under my terms. And my terms are simple. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping back to that terrifying, lethal calm. First, Harrison Vance is terminated immediately with cause for blackmail and corporate espionage. He receives no severance, his stock options are frozen, and if he breathes a single word of this to the press, my legal team will bury him so deep in civil lawsuits his grandchildren will be paying off the debt. Harrison opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer fury of the other board members, who were now staring at him like he had just set their money on fire, silenced him completely. Second, Victoria continued, addressing the rest of the room, you will all sign a unanimous vote of absolute confidence in my leadership today. You will never question my authority, my decisions, or my personal life ever again. If any of you have a problem with a woman in a wheelchair running this empire, or the fact that she loves another woman, you can sell your shares and get out. 'Cause if you fight me, I will resign. I will take Chloe, I will take the Vanguard account, and I will start a rival firm tomorrow that will bankrupt Sterling Corp within a year. Test me. I dare you. The absolute dominance in her voice left no room for negotiation. Victoria held all the cards, and she was playing them with ruthless perfection. The senior director cleared his throat, sweating profusely. The board accepts your terms, Ms. Sterling. Unanimously. Harrison, security will escort you out. Victoria didn't wait to watch Harrison's humiliating exit. She spun her wheelchair around, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and burst out into the hallway. Daniel! Victoria yelled, her voice echoing down the corridor. Daniel practically sprinted from his desk. Yes, Miss Sterling? Where is she? Victoria demanded, her chest heaving, the adrenaline of the boardroom fading into pure, desperate panic. She left, ma'am. 10 minutes ago. She took her things and went home. Victoria cursed, slamming her hand against the armrest of her chair. Get the car, Daniel. Right now. Across the city, the gloomy sky had finally broken, unleashing a torrential downpour over Queens. Chloe sat on the edge of the lumpy sofa in her small apartment, her knees pulled up to her chest, shivering despite the thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Cardboard box sat on the floor near the door, a painful monument to her shattered dreams. Grace was sitting beside her, gently stroking Chloe's damp hair. Chloe had walked through the door soaking wet, having walked the last 5 blocks from the subway in the pouring rain, and completely broken down in her grandmother's arms. I lost her, Nana, Chloe sobbed, burying her face in her hands. The physical pain in her chest was so sharp she could barely breathe. I lied to the board to protect her. I made myself look like a monster so they wouldn't take her company away. But I lost her. Oh, my brave, beautiful girl, Grace hushed softly, kissing the top of Chloe's head. Her grandmother's voice was strong now, the medical treatments having worked miracles. You did the most selfless thing a person can do. You sacrificed your own happiness to protect the woman you love. But true love, Chloe, it doesn't just let go that easily. She can't come after me, Chloe cried, wiping her swollen eyes. If she does, Harrison will ruin her. It's over. I just have to figure out how to start over again. A heavy, mournful silence fell over the small apartment, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing fiercely against the thin glass of the windows. Chloe closed her eyes, exhausted to her very bones. She imagined the smell of cedarwood, the touch of cool fingers on her jaw, and the intense, protective gaze of ice-blue eyes. She wondered if the ache in her heart would ever fade, or if she was doomed to carry the ghost of Victoria Sterling with her for the rest of her life. Suddenly, a loud, sharp knock echoed at the front door. Chloe jumped, her heart skipping a beat. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 11 a.m. Were you expecting someone, sweetheart? Grace asked, looking toward the door with a puzzled frown. No, Chloe whispered, her brow furrowing. Maybe it's the landlord. She stood up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her bare feet patted softly against the creaky hardwood floor as she approached the door. She unlocked the deadbolt and slowly pulled the door open, ready to apologize for whatever noise complaint the neighbors had filed. But it wasn't the landlord. Standing in the dim, flickering light of the rundown hallway was Daniel. He was soaking wet, holding a massive black umbrella that dripped rainwater onto the cheap linoleum floor. Chloe's breath hitched. Daniel? What are you doing here? Daniel didn't answer. He simply stepped to the side, lowering the umbrella. Behind him, positioned perfectly in the center of the cramped hallway, sat Victoria. She was drenched, her expensive white blazer clinging to her skin, her dark hair plastered wildly against her cheeks. The terrifying ice queen who had just subjugated a board of billionaires was completely gone. Instead, Victoria was looking up at Chloe with eyes wide, desperate, and overflowing with raw, unfiltered emotion. She was breathing heavily, as if she had fought through a war zone just to reach this very door. Chloe stood completely paralyzed, the air trapped in her lungs. The world stopped spinning. The sound of the rain faded into a dull hum, leaving only the magnetic, undeniable pull between them. You really thought, Victoria whispered, her voice cracking with a beautiful, devastating vulnerability, that I would let you go that easily? End of Part 9. Part 10, The Empire We Built. Chloe's heart stopped entirely. She stood in the doorway of her cramped, run-down queen's apartment, staring at the most powerful woman in Manhattan, who was currently sitting in a wheelchair on a cheap linoleum floor, completely drenched in freezing rainwater. For a terrifying, suspended second, neither of them moved. The torrential downpour hammered against the small hallway window, but all Chloe could hear was the frantic, deafening drumming of her own pulse in her ears. Victoria! Chloe gasped, her voice barely a breath. Paralysis finally broke, replaced by a sudden, frantic surge of adrenaline. She rushed forward, entirely ignoring Daniel, who offered a small, respectful nod before stepping back and pulling the apartment door shut behind her, giving them absolute privacy. You're freezing, Chloe said, dropping to her knees in front of the wheelchair. She grabbed the lapels of Victoria's soaked, expensive white blazer, her hands trembling violently. What are you doing here? Victoria, if Harrison sees you, if the board finds out you came after me, he'll leak the photo. He'll take everything from you. Victoria didn't care about the cold. She didn't care about her ruined clothes or the puddle of rainwater forming around her tires on the worn hardwood floor. She reached out, her freezing, shaking hands desperately gripping Chloe's wrists. Harrison Vance is currently being escorted out of my building by 3 armed security guards, carrying his things in a cardboard box, Victoria stated, her voice trembling not from the cold but from sheer, overwhelming emotion. He is fired. His stock is frozen. The board has signed a unanimous, legally binding declaration of absolute confidence in my leadership, and if any of them ever speak a word against me or the woman I love again, I will personally bankrupt their entire bloodlines. Chloe's jaw dropped. She stared into Victoria's ice-blue eyes, which were currently burning with a fierce, protective fire that took Chloe's breath away. How? Victoria, how did you do that? He had the photo. He had a photo, Victoria corrected, a dark, triumphant smirk flashing briefly across her face. But I had the Vanguard contract. Contract that Marcus Thorne specifically demanded have a keyman clause. A clause dictating that the $50 million account was entirely contingent on Chloe Adams remaining the lead project manager. Chloe's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Marcus tied the contract to me? Because you earned it, Victoria whispered fiercely, her grip on Chloe's wrists softening, her hands sliding up to cup Chloe's wet, tear-stained cheeks. When you resigned, the Vanguard account died. Harrison didn't save the company. He effectively destroyed our biggest quarterly gain. The board turned on him like a pack of starving wolves. I gave them a choice, Harrison's head on a platter and their absolute submission, or I walk away, take Vanguard and start a rival firm. Tears welled up in Chloe's eyes anew, spilling hot and fast over Victoria's cold thumbs. She couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what Victoria had just done. The Ice Queen had walked into a room of billionaires, flipped the entire chessboard over and burned it to the ground, all to protect her. You risked your entire empire, Chloe sobbed, leaning her face heavily into Victoria's palms. Your father's legacy. You risked everything for me. My empire means absolutely nothing if you are not standing beside me to rule it, Victoria said, her voice cracking with a devastating, beautiful vulnerability. Do you understand me, Chloe? You are my heart. You walked into a boardroom and threw yourself on a sword to protect me. You lied to the world to keep me safe. No one has ever loved me like that. Not ever. I couldn't let them hurt you, Chloe whispered, her hands coming up to grip Victoria's wrists tightly. I love you so much it feels like I can't breathe. Then breathe with me, Victoria pleaded softly, leaning down. Their lips met in a desperate, shattering collision. It wasn't the slow, lingering kiss of the rooftop terrace, or the adrenaline-fueled kiss of the alleyway. This was a kiss of absolute survival. It was the desperate clinging of two people who had almost lost each other to the dark, and were finally finding their way back to the light. Chloe kissed her back with a fierce, possessive hunger, pulling herself up until she was practically draped over Victoria's lap, wrapping her arms securely around the CEO's neck. Victoria let out a shaky, beautiful groan, her arms wrapping tightly around Chloe's waist, anchoring her. The cold rain, the corporate warfare, the fear of the board, it all melted away, leaving only the searing, undeniable heat radiating between them. When they finally broke apart, both of them were gasping for air, their foreheads resting against one another. Victoria let out a quiet, breathless laugh, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure relief. Excuse me, a gentle, raspy voice called out from the living room. Victoria stiffened slightly, blinking in surprise. Chloe turned her head, her cheeks flushing a deep, brilliant crimson. Grace was sitting in her worn armchair, the thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was looking at the two women in the hallway with a warm, incredibly knowing smile. The medical treatments had brought the color back to her cheeks, and her eyes sparkled with amusement. I assume, Grace said kindly, that this is the famous Victoria I have heard so much about. Victoria instantly shifted back into her polished, authoritative posture, though the fierce blush on her own cheeks betrayed her. She wheeled herself smoothly into the small, cramped living room, navigating the narrow space with practiced ease, until she was positioned near Grace's chair. Mrs. Adams, Victoria said, her voice dropping into a deep, respectful register. She extended a hand. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you. I am Victoria Sterling, and I want to apologize for tracking mud into your beautiful home. Grace took Victoria's hand, her smile widening. Oh, please. Call me Grace. And you don't need to apologize for the mud, dear. You just gave my granddaughter her smile back. That is all I care about. Grace paused, her eyes searching Victoria's face intently. You love my girl, don't you? Victoria didn't hesitate. She didn't look away. With my entire soul, Grace. And I promise you, as long as there is breath in my lungs, no one will ever hurt her again. Grace nodded slowly, tears shining in her eyes. Good. Now, somebody get this poor woman a towel before she catches pneumonia. We have a lot to celebrate. 6 months later. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a blinding sea of flashing cameras, diamond necklaces, and the most powerful elite in Manhattan. It was the night of the annual Sterling Corp charity gala, and the energy in the room was absolutely electric. Company had not just survived the Vanguard launch, it had exploded. The Grit campaign had swept national advertising awards, breaking sales records and cementing Sterling Corp as the undisputed king of the industry. The board of directors, previously a den of vipers, had been thoroughly domesticated. They nodded respectfully when spoken to, terrified of invoking the wrath of the Ice Queen, who now ruled her empire with absolute, unquestioned authority. But the biggest change wasn't the profit margins. It was the woman standing at Victoria's side. Chloe Adams, the newly appointed vice president of marketing, was holding court. She stood near the center of the ballroom, dressed in a breathtaking, custom-tailored sapphire blue gown that matched the exact color of Victoria's eyes. Her dark blonde hair was swept over one shoulder, and she commanded the attention of 3 major tech CEOs with an effortless, brilliant charm. She wasn't just surviving the corporate world anymore, she was dominating it. Across the room, Marcus Thorne was laughing loudly at a joke, raising a glass of champagne in Chloe's direction. Victoria sat a few feet away, sipping her own champagne, watching Chloe with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. The CEO was wearing a sleek, midnight black tuxedo, her silver wheelchair polished to a mirror shine. She had spent the last 20 minutes ignoring the desperate networking attempts of a real estate tycoon, completely captivated by the way the chandelier light caught the sparkle in Chloe's eyes. She is magnificent, isn't she? Daniel murmured, appearing silently at Victoria's side, holding a fresh glass of water. She is a force of nature, Daniel, Victoria agreed softly, a proud smile playing on her lips. I merely gave her the stage. She built the empire herself. As if feeling the weight of Victoria's gaze, Chloe excused herself from the tech CEOs and walked across the ballroom. The crowd naturally parted for her, murmuring in respectful, hushed tones. They were the ultimate power couple of Manhattan. Untouchable. Unstoppable. You look bored, Miss Sterling, Chloe teased, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to Victoria's cheek, entirely unbothered by the hundreds of eyes watching them. I am entirely bored of everyone in this room who isn't you, Victoria purred, her eyes darkening with that familiar, possessive heat. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing the bare skin of Chloe's arm. Walk with me. The air in here is becoming suffocating. Your wish is my command, Chloe smiled, smoothly taking the handles of Victoria's chair, though Victoria easily maneuvered herself. They slipped out of the crowded ballroom, passing through a set of heavy French doors, and out onto a massive private stone balcony overlooking Central Park. Crisp spring air was incredibly refreshing, and the muffled sound of the jazz band inside faded into a pleasant hum. The city lights sparkled below them like a sea of diamonds. Chloe walked to the edge of the stone balustrade, taking a deep breath of the cool air. She looked out over the city, the very same city that had nearly crushed her just a year ago. Grace was healthy, living in a beautiful brownstone Chloe had bought for them. Her career was flourishing, and the woman of her dreams was sitting right behind her. Victoria rolled her chair forward until she was right beside Chloe. She reached out, her cool hand wrapping gently around Chloe's warm one. I was thinking today, Victoria murmured, looking out at the skyline. About the rain. About that iron grate on 5th and Madison. Chloe smiled softly, looking down at their joined hands. I hated that grate. I thought it ruined my entire life. I was exactly 4 minutes late to that interview. The best 4 minutes of my life, Victoria said fiercely. She turned her chair slightly, forcing Chloe to look at her. The moonlight cast a soft, ethereal glow over Victoria's sharp, aristocratic features. I was stuck in a storm long before my chair got caught in that drain, Chloe. I was angry, isolated, and entirely consumed by the ice I built to protect myself. And then you dropped to your knees in the freezing mud, bleeding and desperate, and you pulled me out. Chloe's breath hitched, the sheer intensity in Victoria's eyes making her heart hammer wildly in her chest. "You are my armor, Chloe," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached into the inside pocket of her tuxedo jacket. "You are my heart. You are the absolute best part of me." Slowly, Victoria pulled out a small, sleek black velvet box. Chloe gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Tears instantly sprang to her eyes, blurring the sparkling lights of the city behind them. Victoria opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of dark silk, was a breathtaking diamond ring. It wasn't gaudy or overly massive. It was a stunning, flawless emerald-cut diamond flanked by 2 deep blue sapphires, set in a delicate platinum band. It was elegant, fiercely unique, and absolutely perfect. "Victoria!" Chloe sobbed quietly, her whole body trembling with sheer, overwhelming joy. "I don't want to conquer this city alone anymore," Victoria said, looking up at Chloe with a devastatingly beautiful, vulnerable smile. "I want to build an empire with you. I want to wake up next to you every single morning, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to carry the weight of the world by yourself again. Chloe Adams, will you marry me?" Chloe didn't hesitate. She didn't need to think. She dropped to her knees on the cold stone balcony, completely disregarding her expensive silk gown, bringing herself perfectly eye level with the woman she loved. "Yes!" Chloe cried, throwing her arms around Victoria's neck, burying her face in the soft fabric of Victoria's tuxedo collar. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Victoria let out a shaky, triumphant laugh, her arms wrapping fiercely around Chloe, pulling her impossibly close. She pressed desperate, burning kisses into Chloe's hair, her own tears of joy finally spilling over. When they pulled back, Victoria's hands were trembling slightly as she took the ring from the box and slid it onto Chloe's finger. It was a perfect fit. Chloe looked at the ring, the diamonds catching the moonlight, and then looked back up into the ice-blue eyes that had captured her soul on a rainy street corner 1 year ago. The Ice Queen had finally melted, leaving behind a love that was stronger than any boardroom, any scandal, and any storm. Victoria leaned in, capturing Chloe's lips in a slow, breathtaking kiss that sealed their promise to the world, to the city, and to each other. They had fought through the dark, and now the Empire was finally theirs. End of Part 10 series finale. Wow. Just wow. Take a deep breath with me, everyone. What an incredible journey we just went on. Can we just take a moment to sit back and really talk about what we just experienced? This wasn't just a typical romance. It was a story about absolute loyalty, fierce protection, and the true power of sacrifice. From the very beginning, Chloe gave up her one chance at saving her family just to help a complete stranger in the pouring rain. And that one moment of pure, selfless kindness completely changed the trajectory of both of their lives. But for me, the absolute peak of this story was that intense boardroom scene. My heart was pounding out of my chest. Chloe literally threw herself under the bus, ruining her own reputation and giving up her dream job, just to protect Victoria's empire from Harrison. She was willing to walk away from the love of her life into the rain so Victoria wouldn't lose her father's legacy. That level of selflessness? It actually had me in tears. And then we have Victoria, the Ice Queen herself. She didn't even hesitate for a second. She walked into a room full of powerful billionaires, flipped the entire chessboard, and risked her whole company just to get Chloe back. The way she used the Vanguard contract to outsmart Harrison and protect Chloe? Absolute perfection. It just goes to show that true love isn't just about the sweet, quiet moments. It's about who is willing to stand in the storm and fight the whole world for you. But now I really want to hear from you. I want to have a conversation with you all in the comments. Be honest, what would you have done in Chloe's position? If you were in that boardroom, surrounded by hostile executives, would you have taken the blame to save your partner's career, or would you have stood your ground and fought back together right then and there? And please tell me, what was your absolute favorite moment in this entire story? Was it the intense, shadowy alleyway kiss in the rain, that fierce boardroom showdown, or the beautiful, emotional proposal on the balcony overlooking the city? Let me know down below. I will be reading and replying to your comments because I love hearing your thoughts. If this story made your heart race, if it made you smile, or if it even made you shed a tear, please hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know exactly what kind of gripping stories you want to hear next. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to your GL girlfriend and turn on those notification bells. We are building such a beautiful, supportive, and amazing community here, and I want you to be a part of every single romance, every intense drama, and every happily ever after we share. Thank you. Truly, thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for feeling these stories with me. You are all incredible. Stay safe, keep believing in true love, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.